Welcome to Customer Love Stories, a podcast where we investigate why certain brands are loved or not loved by their customers. I'm your host, Robi Ganguly, CEO and co-founder of Apptentive. For those of you who don't know, Apptentive is a Seattle-based voice of the customer solution. We work with lots of really large consumer brands, touching millions of customers every month. But we're not here to talk about that. Today, we're talking about emotions, loyalty, fandom, and customer love with Rand Fishkin. Rand, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, my pleasure, Roby. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
So we met in the Seattle tech startup scene when I was running a company called Moz, which I started many, many years ago, 2003, initially as a blog, and then later a consulting company, and finally a software company. I started that actually with my mom, Jillian. Very unusual venture-backed startup co-founder team, mom and son, possibly the most unusual one. And Moz raised lots of money, had kind of that rapid growth over a number of years, and then kind of plateaued. I stepped down as the CEO of Moz in 2014 during a bout with depression, actually, and promoted my longtime chief operating officer to the role. And I think that, maybe a year, 2 years into that growth and a lot of other things got really rocky. I left the company in 2018 and wrote a book called Lost and Founder, a painfully honest field guide to the startup world, which is both loved and hated by certain folks. Generally strongly disliked by the venture capital set. I think you'll never find a VC recommending anyone read Lost and Founder. But lots of founders like it, and that means a lot to me. The next day, the day after I left Moz, I started a new company, also a software company, called SparkToro. And that's where I'm at these days. That company's been alive for 4 years, and the product has actually been live for only 2. I started that with an old friend from Moz named Casey Henry. And we have one team member, Amanda Natividad, down in California. And the three of us are trying to make audience research software easy, make it useful for anyone and everything. And then the last thing, Roby, well, 2 last things. I am the creative director and funding source for a video game, a top-down chill action RPG, tentatively called The Snack Bar at the End of the World, about being a chef in Italy and going out into the wilds, and you fight some monsters, and you bring back your pancetta, and you make your carbonara, and at your restaurant, and upgrade your armor and all that kind of stuff. So that game is probably a few years away. Studio in Los Angeles called Akupara Games is working on that with us, and that's been an incredibly interesting and exciting process. And I'm most famous, actually, for being Geraldine de Ruyter, yes, the famous author's husband. So lots of times I got recognized at the grocery store, dude. Recognized at the grocery store. Someone was like, "Hey, you're that guy who went to the Italian restaurant and had the terrible meal." Like, yep, that's me.
I can honestly say that is the most complete and diverse intro we've had to date, and I think it's going to be hard to beat. I think that everybody who's listening right now should already get a sense that you're not going to hold any punches. You're going to talk about what matters to you. And I think that that's part of the appeal of this, is talking about what matters to us. So, I'm going to kick you off. This is about fandom. It's about emotion. Who or what are you a fan of? And I think that there's a number. So let's start with one.
Sure.
That maybe you're wearing as a shirt. Like,
oh, yeah. Yeah. This brand. So this is Descendant of Thieves, this t-shirt, which you can see it's got kind of like an interesting design around the collar, and has some interesting stuff around it. So they make these very unique pieces of menswear. Each of them has a number on them, kind of like a barrel of wine or something. And there's very, very few made of each kind, and so you can't order most stuff, after it's out of production. It's mostly online. I believe they have one store somewhere in New York City. But I've been buying their stuff for, 4 or 5 years now, and have probably 24 pieces of their clothing. Just love them to pieces. You know what I also like? They're actually, it seems like they'd be incredibly expensive, but they're not. So, I mean, some of the t-shirts are like $75, which is expensive for a t-shirt. Some of the shirts are, $150, which is expensive, but it's not high fashion prices, right? It's not haute couture, that kind of thing. So, yeah, it's a very, very cool brand. They do a lot of unique styling. The package that you get it in has these like beautiful sort of notes that you could imagine is from a steampunk game, and it looks like it's been, stolen and shipped to you during the Cold War. It's spy chic.
Spy chic. Spy chic is a new chic I have not heard of before, but I get it.
I don't know how exactly to describe it, but that's the best I can do.
No, I think it's visually like it gives me imagery, and you're also great with words and descriptors. I think spy chic is definitely going in the vernacular.
I mean, I pay attention to like, whatever kind of designy things, and whether that's interior design or art stuff or fashion types of things, right? And so I'd seen this brand mentioned. I checked out their website, and when I saw their stuff, I was intrigued. At the time, they didn't have a physical store. In fact, I've still never been to the physical store. And I, ordered their stuff. It was a good fit for me. Everything just worked. They have a really nice return policy. So yeah, and I like unique things for fashion, right? I like stuff that people haven't really heard of. I'm not a big fan of like wearing whatever Nike or Adidas or even things like the North Face or Patagonia or something. Like, I have no problem with these brands. I have some problems with Nike, but generally I have no problems with big brands. It's just not for me. I like small. I like independent. I like scrappy.
Yeah. Well, and I think that one of the things that keeps coming up for a lot of our guests is like a sense of identity, right? And like when you get an emotional connection with a brand, like a clothing brand, a fashion brand, there's this flag you're wearing, in the terms of like their clothes, you walk around in it. And so it's gotta connect with your identity, right? Like, so when you're saying, hey, I like these things, these small scrappy things, and then you come across this brand, do you immediately go to vetting, hey, are they really in this consideration set?
Yeah, I do. I'm perhaps more particular than most people. And I think I'm also relatively unique in this way, where big brands are almost automatically a turnoff for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that I won't buy from them. I own some Converse, which, I realize is bought by Nike. They used to be a really cool independent brand, right? For a long, long time they were. And I don't know, I'm very sad that Nike bought them. I think that kind of sucks. I was the same way with Zero Grand. Zero Grand was like my favorite shoe brand for a couple of years. And then Nike bought them as well. And I think during the Cole Haan acquisition.
Yep.
And yeah, that frustrates me. I used to love Whole Foods. And then Amazon bought them, and now I don't shop there at all. Now I love Town and Country Markets, which is like a Seattle local market. I think they only have half a dozen locations. It's a little pricier for most stuff, but not much. And yeah, if I can, I'm going to buy everything I can there. For lots of reasons, right? I want to support that kind of locally owned presence. I had all my prescriptions going to Bartell Drugs, and unfortunately they got bought by CVS. So yeah, anyway, you can see why I do a lot of work with antitrust, advocating for, hey, maybe we should try and keep the economy a little more balanced, a little more indie, a little more distributed, versus what we have now, which is just this monopolies over everything.
Right. And you get to vote with your dollars, right?
Yes.
Like the thing that you are doing on a regular basis is you're voting with your dollars. Like, these things matter. These things frustrate me. I'm going to make choices with my dollars. And when I think about this, it's like, this is what's so interesting to me, is like how you get connected with these brands and you trust them and you get emotionally connected and you end up with 21 pieces, right? Like from an email newsletter that, puts you in front. So you found them through this email newsletter. What's the first piece you bought?
Ooh, good question. I believe it was a long sleeve shirt. I think, gosh, it is, I still own it. Button up shirt. Yeah, kind of lovely design. I would not say it is timeless. They are fashion forward. And so that means this shirt might be getting given away in the next few years.
Yep.
um,
Yep.
but nevertheless, I really love it. I think I bought a jacket from them thereafter, and then a few more shirts. I've actually ordered a bunch of stuff from them and then returned it, and they have a very good, credit policy. And so I know that I'm going to buy more stuff from them, and that works out fine. And the other thing, I think this is true for products of all kinds, right? Is that they find their people, and I'm their people because I match with, sort of their brand ethos and who they are, and also because the clothes fit me. I don't know if you can tell from the video, but I have very slender shoulders for a man. Like, I'm not super short. I'm like half an inch shorter than the average American male. Like I'm 5'8", and my shoulders are significantly smaller than most people my height. And so finding a narrow fit where the shoulders don't fall off the edges of your arms is a unique thing. I think this is true for, a lot of stuff. I buy lactose-free ice cream because, like many Jews, I am lactose intolerant. And so, this is not exclusively true of clothing. I think people do this in every aspect. They find, and this is where the value of a brand comes in, right? They find a brand that matches kind of ethically and ethos wise, also matches things that they like and fits them, whether that's literal or figuratively. And in this case, Descendant of Thieves fits me.
Yeah, right, right. And it's funny because we're about the same height, but I have the opposite problem where my shoulders are too wide. And so then I end up having to get larger shirts because otherwise the shoulders are in like this. But then I've got this whole bagginess thing going on, right? So it's know what you're talking about. Once you find that thing that fits, like I've found a brand that has perfect shirts. It's like click, click, click.
Exactly. And then sometimes brands change their fit and it's infuriating.
Oh,
infuriating. I don't understand.
It's like, did you change factories and not do the measurements? What's happening?
I think it's they find that they're getting a whole bunch of customers who don't match the size model that they're using, and whatever they're trying to expand. So Descendant of Thieves, for example, released a relaxed fit line, which doesn't fit me at all.
Yep.
Frustrating. So I got to wait for their regular stuff, their slim fit stuff, to come back.
Got it. All right. Well, so now we found out how you learned about them, how they built some credibility with you. The first shirt, fashion forward, you're like, it fits, it's great. You up level your investment. I'm imagining a jacket's more expensive than a shirt, right? And then you start getting some other shirts. You start returning things. So along the way, that it sounds like they're building a lot more credibility with you. They're bringing you more into the fold. You're, instead of being on a newsletter subscription, you're probably subscribed to their newsletter now.
I am. Yep.
There you go. Right.
In fact, that's how I've bought most of the pieces I bought over the last 5 years, which is through their email newsletter, which I get. Frustratingly, I can't convince Gmail to put it in my primary tab, so I have to go check my promotions tab to actually find this. But I'm willing to do it, right? And they're not alone. I also shop from Italy and My Panier, which are both online sort of specialty food stores. Force of Nature and Crowd Cow, right, which is a local. They send their newsletters to me, and I have to go check my promotions tab for them. So I'm going in regularly. I would say email newsletters is how, once I like a brand, that's how I basically stay connected to that brand.
Right.
And I like having all my communication in one place. I don't really understand folks who are like, well, I just wait for the next Instagram ad or, something to pop up in my feed. Like, oof, no, that's not for me. I need that consistency. I want that messaging. If I really love your brand, I'm going to be subscribed to your email newsletter.
Yep. Okay. So that's what that looks like for you. You make that jump into, I'm subscribing to your newsletter. I expect you to do it. What would they have to do to break that relationship with you, to lose your love? Like, I think I heard one thing, which is if they change the fit, right? Like if they change the fit, if they had this regular or slim fit and then relaxed fit became actually slim fit, you just go, I think, nah, not for me anymore. That's probably one way. But what else could they do that would lose you?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you a sad and frustrating story. So, person I consider a friend, Eric Bandholz runs Beard brand out of Austin, Texas. Beard
Can't
brand is a
imagine
brand
why
that
you or I would be paying any attention to those things.
I mean, so I don't know if you remember Roby. I used to have that crazy
Oh
curly
yeah,
mustache. It
totally.
looked, in fact, there you go. It looked like that.
Yeah, it did. It was
Yeah,
awesome.
and it was fairly ridiculous at the time. I'm glad to have it gone, but I needed mustache wax for it and beard care and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, I used Beard brand for years, and tragically, challengingly, frustratingly, Eric became like a big Trump fan and kind of a, I don't know, conservative, and took the brand a little bit in that direction. This is like 2016, 2017. And I just stopped. I unsubscribed to the newsletter,
Right.
stopped following them on social. I never bought from them again.
Yep.
Right. So that's another thing, right? Where, yeah, if we're not kind of ethically aligned, right? Like if you don't think that Black Lives Matter and you are not, pro trans people being allowed to exist, and again, I'm going to vote with my dollars, right? Like that's not, I have every privilege in the world to be able to, rapidly change where I spend my money. I don't have to shop at whatever the only store in town, right? Especially with the internet.
Right.
So, yeah, that's another quick way.
And when stuff like that happens to you, you're a pretty strong communicator. I think of you as somebody who stands up for what he believes in and doesn't shy away from talking about it. In those moments where you break up with brand, where you leave them, do you tell them why?
Yeah, I mean, not always. No, I think, I'm trying to remember who was a good example of this. So big brands, like if I'm big, I don't have to tell Amazon, like, hey, I really hate a lot of things that you're doing. I'm not.
Right.
Bezos doesn't care, like.
He's like, I got another email from Rand. It's the same shit.
Oh my God. You know what? I should change my ways. I wish it worked like that, but it does not. But smaller brands, yeah, right. So I, before I sort of, whatever you want to call it, broke up with Eric and Beard brand, like we had several exchanges that I think were, bordering on polite, impolite.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't angry. I was disappointed in someone I considered a friend. I was sad about it. I wish that I could have, I don't know, made the case more strongly. I feel like he's a good person who should have better ethics around this stuff. It's sad, right? And so we did have a few conversations, public conversations, before that breakup. But big brands, no.
Yep, that makes sense. Because I think what an underlying theme is like you being able to make a difference. That it's small, that it's got like your dollars help it to exist, right? That it supports this ethos or whatever, the correct fit. Like these are things that you can put your dollars towards. So you're like, hey, I can help you move this forward. But also in a situation like that, I think what I'm picking up on that is very much you is the idea that you're like, hey, Eric, maybe you didn't see this the way I do, and maybe I could influence you. And so I'm going to invest in giving you this feedback or my feedback about this and maybe try to take you there. Even if it doesn't work, the fact that you're willing to do that is pretty extraordinary when you think about it, right? And that in and of itself is identification of emotional connection you brought to that.
I mean, I think that this is something that Roby, like I've picked up, especially the kind of last 10 years of my life, which is if there's a really difficult conversation, one that makes you nervous and it's going to be hard, the words are hard to even think of, it leaves that like ugly feeling in your throat and your stomach, and you're dreading it.
Yep.
That's probably the most important conversation you can have. That's probably the most worthwhile, difficult one. And that's true whether it's, with your spouse or with your partner romantically. It's true whether it's with family or friends, coworkers, a boss, someone who reports to you. Like you got to have it. Sitting on it quietly, fearing it, hoping it'll go away. In my experience, that never works. it just doesn't. I remember, I mean, speaking of this time period, right? Like that 2016 time period, and probably just as strongly, if not more, 2020. That April, May, June, I had probably half a dozen ludicrously uncomfortable phone calls, right? With friends and some family, about why they should support the Black Lives Matter movement. And oh man,
Yep.
you're not going to find a more and it's, it feels super weird too, as like a white guy who's generally doing great, and kind of like, why am I the person having this confrontation? Well, I think I'm supposed to be. It probably is really important, but man, just finding the like courage. I remember I had a call with Geraldine's, she's got a half brother in the UK who just kind of didn't really understand the issues at all, and we had a long, painful conversation, but it was really positive. Like he really came around. He loves her a ton. He wanted to be still close to her, and he listened, and did some reading on his own that I asked him to, and changed his mind. Was like, okay, I really didn't understand like this issue the way you presented it, and I really appreciate it. And the second call turned really beautiful. So that sometimes it can work. Sometimes it goes well.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that investment in a person, right, in that situation, or the investment in a brand and a person, right, because ultimately brands are made up of people, companies are made up of people. Like that investment in those people is like so important when you feel that way, and then you're able to invest and say, hey, like I just want to bring something to you. I want to bring my opinion and how this is shaping my willingness to do business with you, or willingness to spend more time together, and like being able to show up and bring that to them. And I like to ask this question when we're talking about this topic, like, what's the craziest thing you've done as a fan? And I want to know that for you too. I'm really curious, but I think that some people would think the craziest thing you do is you try to change their minds.
Yeah. I mean, that's certainly, it's interesting, right? I want to change their minds so I can be a fan, so I can stay a fan, so that the fandom can deepen. Because I love loving people. I love loving things.
Oh man, you and me both.
Yeah, it's just fantastic. I have so many passions, and I think when I find those, when I get to invest in them and give them time and energy and attention, nothing's more fulfilling in life.
Right.
There's there's nothing better. But okay, the craziest thing so I'll give you a recent example. There's probably even crazier things I've done, but so I played this video game from a I think they're a Latvian studio called ZAUM, or maybe it's Zaum. I'm not sure exactly. It's ZA/UM. They started as an artist collective, very kind of classic Marxist socialist artist collective, and then developed this video game called Disco Elysium. And I don't know if you've played it, Robi,
I haven't. But what platform is it on?
All the platforms now.
Oh,
I think
cool.
It's on everything.
Disco Elysium.
Not you can't play it on mobile device, but everything else, right? So Steam, Switch, Xbox, PlayStation, Epic Games.
I'm glad you called that out, because I like the first place I would go is my phone. I'm like, all right.
No, don't do that. Disco Elysium is it's a detective game. You sort of wake up as this broken alcoholic detective who's lost his memory due to drugs and alcohol, and discover in the first few minutes of the game that you're on a case. You're trying to solve a murder. And the writing is, 5 stars. Just video games are not written like this. It's beautiful and enthralling and incredible. The soundtrack is done by British Sea Power, the band. Again, just stunningly well done. The character development, the voice acting is incredible. So two things related to this game. One is, for some reason, the studio, the makers ZAUM, they started a ZAUM atelier, like a little clothing shop that goes along with the game, because I guess tons and tons of fans were saying that they wanted the clothes that specifically that the detective's partner is wearing in the game. This character Kim Kitsuragi, and Kitsuragi has like a iconic orange bomber jacket. I ordered the iconic orange bomber jacket. This is particularly impressive because they sell out within seconds. So you have to like go to the shop and buy it immediately as soon as it goes on sale. I missed the first time that they offered, they had like 75 of them that you could buy. And I managed to get in on the second run. But yeah, it was an intense experience of like sitting there. I scheduled myself so that I could. It's like buying Springsteen concert tickets.
Right.
Or something.
I was just thinking about it. Like, it's like the concert ticket you really want. It's like it goes on sale at 10 a.m. and you're just click. Ah, why is it waiting?
Anyway, hopefully Geraldine and I can dress up as the detective and his partner for Halloween. That's my goal.
Oh, that's the goal of getting the bomber jacket. I love this. So we have like a follow-up in a couple months, I think, to get pictures of that and append them to this podcast. I think that sounds amazing. So that's pretty wild, right? Like you're a fan of a video game and you jump into buying a bomber jacket as a result, right? This is not coming in through your email newsletter about fashion. This is like, I love your video game and your design aesthetic, and like everything that you do makes me feel like I fit into this world. And now I'm like, yeah, put me in. Is that right?
Well, and I think, one of the things about this game in particular is that the writing, the style, the world that they've built around it, the kind of adventure, the story that you experience, because it is so well crafted, and because it fits with so many of my ideals and interests. If someone else has played this game, we are probably going to be friends.
That is fascinating.
And so this is, I think this is one of those things where kind of like having the Adventure Time art on the wall behind me, or, right. The whatever comic book stuff, that a lot of people put in their rooms now. It's a connection builder.
Yep.
Right. It helps. The fandom actually connects you with another person. And this is true. This is true in clothing. It's true in, whatever it is, hairstyle. It's true in food and restaurants. It's true in music for sure. It's true in art. It's true in television and movies. Like, all this stuff is not just, I love it, I'm a fan of it. It's, if you are also a fan, we have a connection.
Right. Totally. 100%. I mean, I think that for me, music is so obviously connected that way. I'm like, oh, you went to the Rufus Du show? Oh, you've seen U2 like 20 times? Oh, you've traveled all over the world to see Pearl Jam? Like, we're going to like each other. There's going to be stuff we have in common. And that feeling with music is just so like deep. It's not just like the thing that I'm buying then returns some utility. It's the thing that I'm feeling that makes me feel like we're going to be connected. And it's like, oh, what's your favorite song? How does it make you feel? What time in your life were you listening to that really resonated? Do you still feel that way, or did that change? Because like with music and favorite bands, there's stuff that I listened to when I was 20. I was like, whew, and now I'm like, yeah, I was 20. So
yeah. I was a young person. Maybe, yeah, exactly.
Some of that stuff changes.
Maybe the Counting Crows weren't quite as deep as I thought they were at the time. Or,
and clearly Duretz is not that great of a singer.
But Pearl Jam, in my opinion, holds up. Like, absolutely holds up. You can look at the songs that they wrote in the early 1990s and say, oh my God, they were 10, 20, 30 years ahead of their time in terms of topics that they were willing to tackle, lyrical construction. I think Pearl Jam is a brilliant band because they are one of the few bands, especially in the 90s. Now it's much more common, but in the 90s, very uncommon in their era or before to separate the vocal melody from the background. The bass and guitar lines. And I mean, you can argue that Eddie Vedder's voice does not beautifully capture that, and that, right, because he's maybe a little mumbly, but I mean, I think that that's a outstanding. And the fact, willing to talk about spousal abuse and the tough situations that women get put in with domestic abuse, and that kids suffer through as a result. And that's that I don't remember someone doing that before them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. And, part of that is not that they had to be the only ones, but they're the ones that you found at that point in time. Right. And I think that's so much of what's interesting about fandom and brands and businesses is like, you don't have to be the only one that stands for these things. What you have to realize is that there's an audience, right, that you're connecting with, and that standing for those things and finding that audience and continue to reinforce it, that's how you get consistency, integrity, a sense of a brand, loyalty, and emotional connection, right? Like you keep showing up in that way. And it's so interesting because you're focused on audience research. I know at SparkToro, and like that must be like in some ways the inverse of what we're talking about. Is like, hey, how do you discover the kinds of like audiences that you really should be in front of?
And then for a lot of our customers, right, is that they're trying to figure out not only where is my audience, but what are their behaviors and demographics, so that I can craft messaging and product and sort of a brand story that resonates, right? So we have our story. I'm trying to tell it in a way that resonates with this group of people in places where they pay attention in ways that work. And I think that that's very, very important, especially for small and medium brands, right? For a lot of big brands, they can be so broad, right? They can do the kind of shotgun approach and just, we're going to throw darts at every wall. But small, medium brands, indie brands, you only get like one dart, right? Like your marketing budget is
right.
itsy bitsy. So you got to make the best use of it that you can. And, a big part of my belief system around this is that historically, especially the last 15, 20 years, everyone just threw it at Facebook and Google and was like, you sort it out. You sort out the targeting, you do the testing. And it kind of worked while those companies had explosive growth and sort of not as many advertisers on their platform and weren't quite as, didn't need to show Wall Street as much growth from existing clients, customers. So now that all those things have changed, not quite the deal that it used to be, and you can get a lot of better results doing it yourself.
Yeah, right. And so one of the things I like to explore in general with the companies that we work with is, if you know your customers better, how much more profitable can you be, right? Like if you understand their needs better, how much more growth can you get, because you don't have to keep chasing the 100 new customers when you're keeping the 2,000 existing customers. You're seeing lots and lots of companies right now turn their attention back to their customer bases. Like, oh yeah, we have scaled back marketing expenses. We've thought about extending our runway and preserving cash. And so it's like, oh, well, how do we pay attention to these existing customers, this audience that loves us? So what I like to explore is like, what do you think the fandom, that loyalty means for the bottom line? Taking, for example, you being a customer of a clothing brand and a video game, both of whom probably have extracted a tremendous amount of value from your relationship financially, and also having you talk about it and expose to other people. What do you think it means to the bottom line? How do you think about that?
So what's interesting is it becomes extremely obvious in companies like ours, software as a service, subscription revenue. You can calculate lifetime value. You know how long an average customer stays with you. You can see when they quit. You can see recidivism. You know how many people come back in a certain amount of time. So for example, Moz had a relatively low churn rate for self-service SaaS. SparkToro has a relatively high one. but Moz's rate of customers returning after they'd quit was much lower. SparkToro's is quite high. So a lot of people like do their audience research, they leave, then they come back 6 months later, 9 months later, 12 months later. I think we've had more than 15% of our customers have come back more than once, and we've only been around 2 years. So
that's phenomenal.
If your
Right.
average customer lifespan is like 8 or 9 months, like that math looks good for the long term.
Right.
But venture capitalists don't believe in people coming back, so they only count churn rate the first time, which I think is pretty dumb. But if you're a clothing brand, you can look at potentially how many pieces of clothing did this person buy over the course of time. It's very hard to see whether that person is an advocate for your brand, right? Are they wearing the clothing around? Almost all of the Descendant of Thieves stuff, for example, is unbranded. Like you'd never be able to know it was Descendant of Thieves unless someone checked the tag, right? So there's little brand markers if you know what to look for, but almost nobody does. A video game is incredibly tough,
right?
Because until Zaum produces another game, or maybe downloadable content, but that doesn't look like something they're going to do. It's not the World of Warcraft days where you pay them a subscription fee every month or anything, or every year. So really different situation there. For Zaum, it's about how do we build the fan base, get our players to recommend the game to other people, which is how a ton of games are sold.
Yep.
And hopefully build a name for ourselves so that our next game sells even better. But then you have to keep up that the quality and consistency. I think this is tough for anyone who's making a one-time use product, a video game, a piece of clothing, a beverage, whatever it is. Like you've got to deliver that product quality so consistently to not lose customers. Yeah.
Right.
For example, I love Campari. I think it's great aperitif. I love a good Negroni. Campari mixes into a whole bunch of cocktails, and I'm a big fan of cocktail culture, even though my tolerance is low. So I generally do like 1 half-strength cocktail. But Campari a few years ago, I think it was a number of years ago now, they like changed their formula. So it tastes pretty close to the same, but the color of the beverage isn't the same anymore. So it used to be this like incredibly deep, rich, ruby red. And now it kind of looks like you dropped some red food coloring in water.
Right.
And they did that because of scale. So the way that they were getting the red color into Campari 20 years ago was via a beetle. You crush the shell of a beetle and it makes this incredibly brilliant red. Anyway, they took it out, so no more beetle in your Campari, which plus side for vegans, but lost something for me. Leopold Brothers, which is a distillery in Colorado, they make an incredible bourbon. They also make a red aperitif in the Campari style, and it uses the beetle.
Oh, no way.
And it's beautiful. It's not just beautiful, it tastes phenomenal. Like if you're going to make a very simple Campari drink, like a Milano Torino, which is just Campari and vermouth, equal parts, I would recommend you should go get the Leopold Brothers Aperitivo. Like it's worth it. It's a couple bucks more. I don't know, maybe it's like $5 more than Campari. But hey, product quality, man. They got it. They nailed it.
Yeah. So I think that I had no idea about this, but the thing that I think you're saying, relative to fandom and opportunity is when Campari said, we've got this thing, it's our core, people know us for it, it looks this way, it tastes this way, makes you feel this way. And they said, well, it doesn't scale this way.
It doesn't scale. Yeah.
We're going to go make this choice and we're going to go this way. And maybe they arguably inside were saying this helps scale and opens us up to vegans. So maybe they were really trying to open up to more of an audience that has a passionate sense of like, I should be able to trust that this is vegan. And that's weird that I can't. So they might be making that choice. I
strongly suspect vegans did not know that.
I bet. Right. Like, exactly. I'm going to guess so too, but the information access nowadays about brands and their inputs is much higher.
Yeah, the internet changed that for sure.
So the optimist in me says, hey, there's people at Campari who are like, we see this coming and we better get in front of it.
Possible.
Pessimist says, oh, they're just focused on scale. But regardless, their change left an opportunity for the Leopold brothers.
Yes.
Right? Their change leaves this opportunity. So like one of the things about fandom and love is that also like as the audience grows and there's more and more people who are around it, there's more and more people who can fall off that you can like pick off as they make changes and choices that maybe don't resonate with the whole group, right? So talk to me more about that. I think you are pretty connected to like seeing these changes and these opportunities. Talk to me more about how you see those places like Leopold Brothers.
Yeah. So I think there's two ways this plays out, right? There's like someone is big in a market and someone small recognizes that a change or a degree of unhappiness has presented opportunity.
Right.
I think that when Whole Foods was sold to Amazon, there were a ton of people who were in the whatever natural foods, natural products market, organic foods, kind of small indie producers who were really scared because Whole Foods had been a primary distribution system for a ton of them. And they rightfully, as the past 10 years have really shown, Whole Foods has extraordinarily narrowed their brand, what they carry in store. It's like 70% Amazon and Whole Foods produced stuff because that's where they can get better margins and whatever, optimize their shipping and their logistics system, which Amazon, I think I would argue, is essentially a very high quality logistics business with a whole bunch of other things on top of it.
Yeah,
including retail. And the folks like, a PCC here in the Northwest, or Town and Country Markets, or Sprouts, right? They recognized this whole, and they started working with a bunch of these smaller brands and trying to provide a more unique experience. I find that really special. I hope that that's an opportunity that continues, and I hope the market kind of bifurcates to where, what historically was dominated by Whole Foods through this kind of whatever you want to call it, organic, natural, indie brands, migrates to a bunch of different providers and probably a bunch of internet commerce as well. And we're seeing that too, right? Force of nature, which we talked about earlier, is this like regenerative agriculture? You can buy wild boar. They tend to slaughter invasive species. That's kind of their primary goal. So they recognize like, hey, venison is a huge problem in New Jersey.
Yeah.
Like we can help. Let's not just kill animals. Let's sell the whole animal, right, to people and use them, which I think is a beautiful thing to do. If you eat meat, you probably should use the whole animal whenever you can. Right. You probably should buy ethically raised meat. You probably should buy invasive species over sort of things that are supposed to be there. So, yeah, I like those brand opportunities a lot. I was talking to a guy. I was at e-commerce day down in Los Angeles. Was that week before last? And there's a beverage company called Perfy, P-E-R-F-Y. They make a kind of a sparkling soda. I think it has some, it's not kombucha, but it's kind of like keto certified nootropic healthy soda. Okay, so I tried some. It's actually great. It's phenomenal. It's like Spindrift and have you had those drinking vinegars, like the Korean drinking vinegars?
No, I haven't.
No, they do them in a bunch of like bars and restaurants here in Seattle. But we got to hang out more, man.
Yeah, totally. Seriously, I'm writing down.
Yeah, I know.
Old Brothers.
Here's what's going to happen. You're going to come over to my house, and we're going to set up a cocktail program, right? Great. And I'm going to take you through like, all right, this is a Campari Negroni. And here's a Leopold Brothers Negroni.
I'm very excited for this.
Or maybe a Boulevardier since we're going to use the bourbon. Anyway, so Perfy, I met the founder, a guy named Vasa, fascinating guy, really, really interesting dude. Anyway, he explained like that Perfy's growth is going to come from a lot of these smaller organic shops, like a PCC, like a Sprouts, and places like a Whole Foods or, I don't know, Safeway, Kroger, et cetera. That's it's a bridge too far for a small brand, right? It's
Yep.
not how you introduce yourself to the market. It's not how you test. It's not how you build your fandom. You
Right.
build your fandom through these sort of smaller stores where this activity happens. So I think for a
Oh, I
lot
love
of
this. I love this. That's so
for a
interesting.
lot of brands, right? The key is to figure out where brand love starts at your size in your sector,
Yep.
which
Yep.
is an audience research task, right? Like
Right.
that Perfy Vasa had to figure out like, oh, maybe I could network my way into Whole Foods, maybe I can network my way into Kroger, but that's not where brand love starts. In our sector, it starts at these types of places, at these types of producers, right? So they do some internet commerce, but he's like, people want to go into a store and buy this one beverage from the beverage section of their, local organic market. That's
Right.
where I got to be.
Right. I love this because I don't think we've yet really approached this topic in this podcast, but it is so interesting that part of customer love and developing it is choosing where you show up and what attack you have for the market. And what you're talking about is that their attack on the market is it's not going to be right if we go through Whole Foods. It actually might destroy us because they might ask things from a scale perspective.
Yes, you mentioned that.
They might be pushing us to do things we're not ready to do. And they're like, well, look, if you want to get this order, you're going to have to do this thing. And it's like cut quality in this place, right? And they're like, that's not how we're going to get love. We're going to go a different route. These stores where we can actually have, maybe they're talking about personal connections with the people who are buying it at the stores. Maybe they're talking about, well, and if we go into these smaller stores, they let us meet our customers and get to know them, right? And then as a result, we can get this sense of like, hey, why is it working? Like, or not? Why aren't you? Why isn't the PCC in Ballard customer buying Perfy, but the PCC customer in North Seattle is? Like, what's happening? And that to me is like sometimes just as important as the way you act after you get them as a customer. It's like, where are you going to find these customers that then can love you?
It's really fun. So fascinatingly, folks have time. Like I would go check out the story of Chuck Taylor. Chuck Taylor was like this, the guy who joined Converse very early on, 1940s, something like that.
Yep.
And the story goes that when he joined, he literally would go and spend a bunch of time with amateur basketball teams and people on courts, playing in neighborhoods and show off the shoes and like share them with people. And then he became this brand ambassador to musicians and rock stars and fashion icons. And, Kamala Harris is freaking wearing Converse on the campaign trail. Like, you obviously Chuck Taylor's been dead for a long time, but this is incredible. It's incredible that sort of on the ground with your early customers in the places where they go, listening to them, responsive to them, either a founder or a product person doing that. I don't think there's a substitute for it. Right. Like I love SparkToro, but you can't get what you can get from an interview in, here's broad data about how people behave online. You've got to take the interview and turn that into data at scale. You can't go the other way.
Well, I mean, I would argue in some places you can, right? But it's really, you got to do both, I think, right? Because like one of the things that we do obviously is feedback at scale for these large consumer brands. And so, we'll run surveys like a customer sat survey, or we'll run surveys on like, hey, you're using this feature. What do you think about it? What are the pieces of this that are working? What's your friction? What's your effort, et cetera? But you can get this aggregate data. But then what we invented was this ability to get to the individual too and be like, hey, here are all the people who answer that specifically, and here's how to get in front of them. So you could recruit them into an interview. So we had a customer.
Sure, right. Okay.
We had a customer WeatherBug that was like, we want to tell stories of our customers. We want to do a television advertisement, but it's not going to be really resonant if it's just us telling the world what we do and why it matters. It's going to be way more resonant if it's a customer of ours that it meant something to. And we have this thing called Spark. Like we are amazingly great at predicting lightning because of the investment we've made. WeatherBug has made this big investment in the antennae that actually are really good at indicating when lightning's coming. So they went and used us to find all the people who are like, oh yeah, I totally use this Spark feature to, avoid lightning, right? And then they followed up with all those people who are like, would you be interested in telling your story in a television commercial for us? And if you would, could you write, a couple hundred characters, just tell us roughly your story. So they got like 1,800 people, I think a weekend to opt in, tell them the stories. And then they just started calling like 100 of those people and listening to the stories. And then they're like, this is the one we're turning into a TV ad, right? So like when stuff like that happens,
I think that's beautiful. Yeah.
it's like so magical, like.
So this is fundamentally, Robi, the difference, right? So SparkToro, because of the types of data we gather, we anonymize and aggregate. So we will never tell you who was that. Give me a list of the 752 people who listen to this podcast who are, following us on Twitter. We're not going to do it, right? Like privacy, it's not technically in violation of privacy, but we feel that it's privacy violating, right? So we don't do it. But in your case, the only people who are providing feedback, right? It's first party data, zero party data.
That's right.
Beautiful.
No, you're picking up exactly one of the things that we're really working hard towards is, feedback data is awesome. It's amazing, but it is also the first party data too. This customer said to you, I want you to have this information.
Yes, exactly.
You're not sneakily getting it. It's like, come on, make it better. Here you go.
Yeah, I mean, right. So Descendant of Thieves sends me an email newsletter that asks for my feedback. I go in there and they say like, your name optional, your email optional. And if I put it in there, I mean, I want them to have that data. I'd love for them to follow up. I'd love for them to talk to me and, make sure, hey, you guys you better not go all relaxed fit. No. I swear I will come to your door in New York and I'll be,
have you seen these shoulders? Like, come on.
Look at this. This body is not a relaxed fit. This is a nebbishy, uptight, always nervous fit.
They're just up here by my ears. That's all. Come on, make it comfortable.
There's a lot of must-see TV going on here.
I love it. It's so funny. But I think there's this point of like, where are you going to find those fans you can cultivate, and how are you going to get that like real one-to-one interaction, and how can you really understand what it's like to walk in their shoes, their Chuck Taylors, if you will. Like that stuff I think is really amazing. I'm curious, have you read Shoe Dog?
I got a copy. I actually gave it away, but I read part of it.
I want to suggest read all of it, because the things I'm sure that you dislike about Nike are totally valid, but the thing that I was impressed with was how much Phil Knight and Coach Bowerman did exactly what you're talking about.
Oh, absolutely.
Making molds for runners over again, and just like spitting that stuff out. And I was just like, I remember reading that and being like, wow, look at that customer love. Like they would literally take this iron, work all night, and then take the shoe back to the two runners that they were working with. They're like, is this better? And then 3 months later, they're like, nope, didn't wear right. Like, back to the drawing board. And it was just this iteration for like a decade, which to me, I was just like blown away. I thought, man, that's fantastic.
I have a really hard time with this. I don't know if you do as well, but I always have a hard time with the recognizing brilliance and genius and taking lessons away and admiring or idolizing aspects of someone when the whole of the person turns me off.
Right. Yeah.
And I think this is probably a weak point for me, right? Like, I think that this is something I would like to evolve on. I want to be able to say, hey, there's lots of things I don't agree with this person on, but I liked X, right? But I thought that X was valuable or something to learn from or an impressive trait. Yeah. I mean, in the case of Phil Knight, like, I don't know, man, he just kind of turned the University of Oregon into his own, like, sort of sadistic kingdom, and everything, just all the things he did with the state of Oregon. And an early adopter of the socialism for the rich in impressive ways. Don't get me wrong. I mean, his political pull was second to none. I think he outworked Microsoft and Bill Gates at the time. So,
I think what you're talking about, again, comes back to like what kind of customer loves there are. You know, like yours
Sure.
has a
Yeah.
whole ethos, whole person, whole org kind of like mentality. And then there are people who are like very much like, nope, I love it for this reason. And I'm always going to love it for this reason. And I don't care
Yeah.
about this other
Yeah.
thing. It's not going to matter to me. And that's a different type of customer love because it's a different human that's expressing that
Absolutely.
emotion and connecting that way, right? And I think one of the things I've learned, because so many of our customers are really large consumer brands, is the thing I've always connected to is at every one of these brands, doesn't matter if on the outside you kind of think of them in one way or another, there are people inside trying to do the right thing. And that's what I connect to is like the people inside trying to do the right thing. You know, and
Yeah.
that's what for me is motivating and allows me to like, hey, can I pick up and learn from over here? Because there's like people inside trying to do the right thing. And I'm like, man, that's what my source of optimism in life is people are trying to do the right thing. Most of us are just trying to get by and do the right thing by each other is my belief, right? I'm very optimistic about that. And it's
Yeah.
like individual humans are great and people suck. You know, like
So
when you
I
put
I think individual humans are great and incentives often suck.
mm-hmm.
The way I view it is like it is really systems and incentives, right? So when you build an incentive system, I, I think it is completely possible that in a capitalist democracy where sending campaign funds to politicians was illegal,
Right,
Phil Knight would be completely above board.
right,
Right? If you were not allowed in the United States to influence politicians, right? If you get arrested for that and like, whoa, you offered $1 million to this person's campaign if they do X, that is like we're going to lock you up, both of you.
yep,
Right? If that were the case, I think you get a dramatically different. Maybe I'd be a Jeff Bezos fan too.
right, right, right.
Like I don't know, but obviously that's not the world that we live in. I think it's pretty tough. It's really, really hard when a company gets big and their incentives get to be, hey, how do I show Wall Street more growth? I promised my investors, I promised my team, I promised that their stock options would be worth more next quarter. I swore to them that would be true. I told them I would do everything I can to make that true.
Yep.
If I got to bribe some governors, I got to bribe some governors, like
Yeah.
let's do it.
Right.
Um,
Right.
I mean, I
I
think
think you're
that,
right about incentives. And I think that unfortunately, the incentive to earn customer love sometimes is not as obvious as the incentives for other activities. Right.
yeah,
And I think that comes back to where you end up making choices. You're like, oh, your other incentives sort of overwhelm this thing and I'm out.
I mean, Comcast does not get customer love, right? They
No.
they get they get almost exclusively customer hate, and I don't actually believe that is because every person who works there, which include I have a friend who works there. I don't think she's evil to her core and like trying to abuse the system. I think that the incentives of Comcast's business model and sort of the way it interacts with the laws we do and don't have means that they are incentivized to act in terrible, terrible ways.
Right.
And as a result, customers hate them and also have no choice but to use them, except for, in a few cities. And
I
yeah,
don't know if
man,
you've
let's,
thought about this much. Like, I suspect you've thought about this area quite a bit. But in a situation like that, where there are these incentives that are leading to bad behavior, let's say somebody takes over that really, really wants to embrace customer love, like embrace that notion of doing the right thing by the customer, and they've got these incentives against them. Have you thought about how a company would have to reboot?
um, so the sad part is it's virtually impossible at large scale.
Mm-hmm.
And that is because Comcast's board of directors is not going to hire a CEO who says, hey, revenue is going to come down substantially, but people will love us more. And in 10 or 15 or 20 years, that will actually be worth more to us, which is conceivably true, right? I think you could make the case that over the lifespan of the next quarter century, it's pretty dangerous to play can we kind of pay off enough cities to not and regions to not invest in broadband internet to where we can maintain the monopoly and be a hated brand and still survive. But that board of directors, they also don't care about the next quarter century, right? They have funds, investment funds, and activist investors breathing down their neck because of the financial machinations of how Wall Street and the public markets work. So I just I don't see it, right? At a private brand, hey man, sky's the limit. You can absolutely do that. There's some really interesting examples of this kind of thing. I mean, the changeover thing is hard, but Bob's Red Mill is kind of an interesting example of this, where they've kind of consistently invested. Oh, there's a flour company in Vermont, King Arthur Flour. Great example of just focusing on long-term customer investments, especially during the pandemic when like prices were going crazy and they were in this tough situation. They basically accepted lower margins to be able to help out customers, right, to maintain the love that they wanted from their audience. So you can find it, but public companies in the United States.
What about T-Mobile? Yeah. So this is what I'm thinking, and I don't know if it fits the model, but I think, several years ago, call it a decade ago, right? They brought in John Ledger, and he came in and he'd worked in the industry, and I think effectively, over the course of a year, he told the board and the street, he's like, look, this industry is just not really meeting customer needs. Now, what does he have? He has a company that's not number one in the category. He's got a clear number one and a clear number two that he's leading a company to go charge against. So, some of what he's operating with is an environment of like, well, let's shake it up. What are we going to do? But I think pretty systematically over the next 5 years, he says, simplify rates, be more kind, lean into customer love and giving rewards to people, and trying to really change some of the ways that overages are charged for and the nickel and diming that's being charged for. And I think on one cynical sense, that's just a marketing story that they tell. But I think underneath it, there's this sense of like, but if you do it, look what happens. Our churn rates go down. Look what happens.
No, I mean, I think that the incentives there are pretty structurally good. So you can generally get away with it. The nice part is it's nationwide. There's not a ton of ways to be a rent-seeking operation, right? And you're not the monopoly. You're challenging the monopolies. So again, all these types of things create incentives for actually better behavior. This is one of my big frustrations with like, a Google or a Facebook or an Apple or something, right? Is that the incentives as they become monopolies, Amazon, really shift away from, hey, let's innovate, let's do amazing things for customers. Google's a great example of this with Project Fi. So I use Project Fi, which I was a T-Mobile customer. I switched to Project Fi. Project Fi is incredibly generous. And there's no way that would be true if Google didn't have this other business that makes almost all their money. And if they weren't like the sixth or seventh, eighth maybe player, right? They're like below Boost Mobile in terms of people, joining their plan. But as a result, I can travel to Europe. My phone works immediately. I get charged no more money. Data full speed in every country that I've ever visited. Costa Rica, rural Costa Rica. Phone works great. No extra charge. I can never recharge more than whatever it is, $75 a month for my plan. Man, that's a pretty unbeatable deal. I can connect my laptop up to it and get, mobile data via Bluetooth. Like, oh my God.
Yeah. And that's where competition is great, right? That's where
competition is so great. So great, right? And when you get no competition, I mean, it's really interesting to see folks like folks who talk about Walmart's terrible behavior over the last 25, 50 years, especially in rural areas, and then seeing how actually Amazon's competition has made Walmart a better employer and stepped up a bunch of their customer service and stepped up made their prices more competitive and all this kind of stuff, right? So yeah, the incentives when you have fair and open competition instead of Comcast, right? Or it gets better.
So I've kept you a little bit longer, but this has just
Okay.
been a fascinating conversation. I've really enjoyed exploring a bunch of this. I feel like we could keep doing this. Maybe we'll have to do it in part two
Love
when
it.
you get the jacket, and maybe we'll talk about Adventure Time, a couple other things. But man, I really appreciate you spending time with us, talking about customer love, talking about some things you love and why, and also thinking about incentives and overall audience research and bringing into the I think the biggest takeaway I'm taking here is thinking harder about, hey, where are you going to start to try and find the customers that might love you? Where are you going to start? How are you going to think about that? That's a big thing I'm taking away from this. So I really appreciate your time, Rand. Where can people find you and connect with you?
Sure. Yeah. So if folks want to try out SparkToro, it's free. It's SparkToro.com. And I write on our blog there pretty regularly. My email is rand@sparktoro.com. And if you're looking for all my tirades against monopolies and my frustrations with incentives and my love for video games and all that kind of stuff, I'm most active on Twitter, where I'm at randfish.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, for everybody who's listening to this, we're going to include some links to some of the things that Rand has shared with us and talked about. And in those show notes, we'll also probably highlight that there's a jacket we're expecting to see in a few months for an outfit that is going to be an amazing couple's outfit. Thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in. Please be sure to subscribe to our podcast, give us a rating and review at www.ratethispodcast.com/CLS so we can get feedback. We love feedback too, and we want to continue talking about customer love and delivering it in the world. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Robi. Take care.